the United States of America, a nation of contrasts, a land where towering skyscrapers meet endless plains, where centuries-old traditions exist beside cutting-edge technology, and where millions of stories intertwine to form one complex identity. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, across 50 states and diverse landscapes, the United States has shaped global culture, politics, and innovation in ways few nations ever have. But to understand America today, we must first understand how it began. Long before the land was called America, it was already a living world shaped by millions of indigenous peoples who had lived, adapted, and thrived here for tens of thousands of years. This continent was not an empty wilderness. It was a network of nations, cultures, and civilizations, each with its own languages, traditions, and systems of knowledge passed down through generations. Across the Mississippi Valley, the mound builders, such as the ancestors of the Mississippian cultures, constructed vast earthen cities like Cahokia, complete with ceremonial mounds, planned neighborhoods, and trade connections that stretched hundreds of miles. These societies organized complex political systems and managed large populations long before modern urban planning existed. In the Southwest, Pueblo civilizations built remarkable stone and adobe settlements, some carved into cliffs and canyon walls. They mastered irrigation in arid landscapes, developing farming techniques that allowed corn, beans, and squash to flourish in harsh desert conditions. Their architecture, astronomy, and spiritual practices reflected a deep understanding of the rhythms of the sun, stars, and seasons. Indigenous peoples across the continent were expert stewards of the land. Through controlled burns, crop rotation, selective harvesting, and deep ecological knowledge, they shaped forests, rivers, and plains in ways that promoted abundance rather than depletion. Many of the crops that would later feed the world, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, and squash, were developed through indigenous agricultural innovation. Their understanding of astronomy guided planting seasons, ceremonies, and navigation. Their medicines, drawn from careful observation of plants and nature, formed the foundation of healing traditions that are still studied today. Land was not something to be owned or conquered, but a living relative, something to be respected, protected, and shared. By the time European ships reached these shores, the continent was already alive with thriving nations, interconnected trade routes, and cultures shaped by thousands of years of wisdom. The story of America does not begin with discovery. It begins with the indigenous civilizations who knew this land, cared for it, and called it home long before the world ever knew its name. In the 16th and 17th centuries, powerful European nations began arriving on the shores of North America. Among them, Spain, France, Britain, and the Netherlands. Each came driven by ambition, the promise of new land, access to valuable resources, expanded trade routes, and greater global influence. Their arrival marked the beginning of profound and often devastating changes for the indigenous nations who already inhabited the continent. Along the eastern coastline, Britain established a chain of settlements that would eventually become the 13 colonies. These colonies developed distinct identities shaped by geography, religion, and local economies. Some thrived on trade and shipbuilding, others on agriculture and plantations, but all remained under the authority of the British Crown. As decades passed, the relationship between the colonies and Britain grew increasingly strained. Colonists were taxed heavily to support British wars and imperial ambitions, yet they had no direct representation in Parliament. Laws regulating trade, settlement, and governance were imposed from across the Atlantic, fueling resentment and a growing sense that distant rulers did not understand colonial realities. The rallying cry of "no taxation without representation" captured a broader frustration over political control and economic freedom. By the mid-18th century, protests, boycotts, and clashes had become common. What began as demands for reform gradually transformed into calls for independence. In 1776, colonial leaders took a historic step by formally declaring their separation from British rule, asserting that all people were entitled to natural rights such as life, liberty, and self-determination. The conflict that followed, the American Revolution, was not merely a war, but a radical experiment in governance. Under the leadership of figures like George Washington, colonial forces challenged one of the world's most powerful empires. Against long odds, they fought for the idea that authority should come from the consent of the governed. The revolution reshaped global history. From its outcome emerged a new nation founded on revolutionary ideals: liberty over monarchy, democracy over empire, and self-government over inherited power. Though imperfect and unfinished, this bold experiment would inspire movements for independence and democratic reform around the world, marking a turning point not only for America, but for the modern age itself. The 19th century was an era of dramatic transformation for the United States, marked by extraordinary growth, bold ambition, and deep, often violent conflict. The young nation pushed steadily westward, fueled by opportunity, economic hope, and the powerful belief that expansion across the continent was both inevitable and justified. Railroads became the steel backbone of this expansion. They connected distant regions, accelerated trade, and transformed small settlements into booming towns and cities. The nation's economy surged as agriculture, mining, and industry expanded, drawing immigrants from around the world who sought a better life and new beginnings on American soil. Yet this progress came at a devastating human cost. Native American nations were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands through broken treaties, military force, and government policies. Entire communities were displaced, their cultures disrupted, and their populations decimated. Trails of forced relocation, loss, and death became permanent scars on the nation's conscience, reminders that expansion was not peaceful, nor universally shared in its benefits. At the same time, the country faced a profound moral and political crisis: slavery. As new states entered the Union, fierce debates erupted over whether slavery would expand or be abolished. The nation became increasingly divided between free states and slaveholding states, between competing visions of freedom, labor, and human dignity. Compromise after compromise delayed the inevitable, but tensions only grew sharper. These divisions finally exploded into the American Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in the nation's history. Brother fought against brother, and the very survival of the United States was placed in doubt. Under the leadership of Abraham Lincoln, the Union fought not only to preserve the nation, but to redefine it. Lincoln framed the war as a test of whether a nation built on liberty and equality could endure. As the conflict dragged on, the purpose of the war evolved, from preserving the Union to ending slavery itself. The Emancipation Proclamation transformed the struggle into a moral crusade, leading eventually to the abolition of slavery through constitutional change. The war changed America forever. It strengthened the federal government, ended the institution of slavery, and reshaped the meaning of citizenship and freedom. But it also left deep wounds, physical, emotional, and political, that would take generations to heal. The 19th century closed with a nation reunited, but fundamentally transformed, stepping into the modern era carrying both the promise of progress and the weight of its past. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, America transformed into an industrial powerhouse. Millions of immigrants arrived through places like Ellis Island, seeking freedom, jobs, and a new life. Factories boomed, cities grew, innovation flourished. During the 20th century, the United States emerged as a global power, especially after World War II, helping shape international politics, economics, and security. Despite progress, equality remained unfinished. The civil rights movement challenged segregation and injustice. Voices rose demanding dignity, opportunity, and equal rights under the law. Through protests, courage, and sacrifice, America took important steps toward a more inclusive society, though the journey continues. Today, the United States is one of the world's most influential nations. It leads in technology, entertainment, military power, and innovation. From Silicon Valley to Hollywood, American ideas reach nearly every corner of the globe. At the same time, the country faces challenges: political divisions, economic inequality, climate change, and questions about its future role in the world. American culture is a mosaic. Music, sports, food, and traditions reflect influences from every continent. Basketball courts, jazz clubs, fast food chains, and national parks all tell different parts of the same story. The United States is not one voice, but many. The story of the United States is still being written. It is a nation shaped by ideals and contradictions, progress and struggle, hope and debate. Understanding America means understanding its past, while recognizing that its future depends on the choices made today. This is the United States of America, not just a place on a map, but an ongoing experiment in freedom.